wake up.
We catch confusion like a virus. We've left the earth in a state.
Friends are out of work and what of the future.
I don't know if I'm doing enough or if it's all too late.
Everyone should be equal. At the end of the day, we're all just people.
Times have been hard for us all, with everything last year has thrown. But we're on your side. You are not alone. Whatever this year brings, we'll face it together. The future's not cancelled.
The Prime Minister makes a commitment to tackle the Irish Sea border problems, but this is the same man who said no Conservative government would ever bring in such a border. So should Unionists trust him again? We'll have the latest on the protocol and the Unionist strategy against it on The View tonight, 10:45, BBC One Northern Ireland.
The BBC News at 10 now on BBC One Northern Ireland with Sophie Rayworth and Tara Mills. Tonight at 10, the Bank of England calls the UK's vaccination programme excellent news and says it should help the economy recover this year. The bank's governor warns that the next couple of months will continue to be difficult, but that should change from April.
I am optimistic that we are now seeing a hugely impressive programme of vaccination, and that we're also now beginning to see the positive benefits of it, and that I think, as we move forwards, that should reduce uncertainty.
But warnings that hundreds of thousands more people will lose their jobs as furlough unwinds. Also tonight, the UK's quarantine hotels, the government says it's aiming to bring them into force from the 15th of February. A new push to get more people vaccinated faster. Health workers take the jabs to older people who can't get to vaccine centres easily. The US and Britain vow to take action after a BBC investigation reveals harrowing accounts of Uyghur women in Chinese camps being tortured and raped. And bucking the trend, the lockdown baby boom in just one street in Bristol.
On BBC Newsline, the Chief Constable says some of the rhetoric about the Irish Sea border has been inflammatory, and the First Minister calls for people to oppose the Northern Ireland Protocol through peaceful means alone.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 10. The Bank of England says the UK economy is in for another tough few months, but it believes that the impact of coronavirus restrictions will not be as bad as last year's lockdown, and the rollout of vaccines will help the economy bounce back. The size of the economy, the GDP, is expected to shrink by 4.2% in the first 3 months of this year. The bank says there could be a rapid recovery from spring onwards. Meanwhile, as the government's furlough scheme winds down, the bank says the unemployment rate is likely to peak at 7.8% by the middle of the year. As our economics editor Faisal Islam reports, there are some reasons for hope, but predicting the course of the economy is as tough as trying to predict this pandemic.
Like every town, city and suburb, Slough High Street is currently locked down again. On the latest figures, it had one of the highest proportions of furloughed employees in the country. Not all of this will return, but the question is, when does the process of reopening begin? It is the Bank of England's job to assess these matters every 3 months. It has been counting not just jobs and prices, but vaccinations too. As a result, the shape of the economy from last year's extraordinary lockdown and autumn recovery looks a little like this, with right now a further significant fall, but not quite as historic as last year, and then a sharp rebound between April and September, growing 5% a quarter as the economy is able to reopen.
I am optimistic that we are now seeing a hugely impressive programme of vaccination, and that we're also now beginning to see the positive benefits of it. And that I think, as we move forwards, that should reduce uncertainty.
This famous century-old industrial estate is the largest in Europe, and while the bank also pointed to a hit, for now, from new trade barriers with the EU, here businesses are investing more in serving customers over the internet.
I think the trends around e-commerce, digital and tech are so strong, and I think the growth that we've seen over the pandemic will continue. I think the recovery will be interesting. What we're hearing from businesses on the trading estate in particular and beyond is this need for a roadmap and certainty coming out of the pandemic.
This lockdown has been quite different from the first one last April. Much more of the economy has been kept open, so the overall economic hit will be smaller than last April. And there's also the certainty now of a vaccine-fueled recovery. We and the Bank of England just don't know exactly when. And that's led to strong calls for the government to keep its high level of support going for months to come. On the site of Slough Old Library, a surprise. Almost to the day of the new lockdown last month, not just one but two hotels opening here, a sign of more wheels of the economy turning during the current lockdown.
There is key workers in this area, and there is a need for construction to continue, and our hotel is very well suited for that. So we decided to open, and we've opened this week, and we've seen a pickup that justifies it.
This is a bet on things getting back to normal at some point.
Yes, I mean, we are very hopeful that travel restrictions will be eased in due course. I mean, it's Slough. Who wouldn't want to travel here?
Right now, it might not look like it, but the bank also pointed to tens of billions of pounds in extra savings by households who have not been able to spend that at some point could be unleashed. Another much-needed shot in the arm at a tough moment for the economy. Faisal Islam, BBC News in Slough.
The hotel quarantine scheme for UK residents returning from coronavirus hotspots should come into force on the 15th of February. The government says that's the date it's aiming for. It's thought that hotels will be asked to provide accommodation for more than 1,000 people a day. It comes after Labour had accused the government of risking lives because of the slow rollout of its new policy. Here's our political editor, Laura Kunsberg.
It's the fire service. We're dropping off your COVID-19 tests.
Even firefighters are on the streets at home in some parts of the country, helping to track the swift-spreading South African variant of the virus.
Morning, sir. Morning.
But the government's been under attack over how they've tried to stop it getting here from abroad. A plan for travellers to quarantine in hotels on arrival is not in action yet.
When you set up a new system of hotel-based quarantine, we want to make sure that we get this right, so that when people go to those hotels, the hotels are in place, the transport is in place. But it really is important to remember that it is already the case that everybody must quarantine for 10 days. That's required by law.
On the 18th of December, the South African authorities confirmed they'd found a new variant. On Christmas Eve, visitors from South Africa were banned. Later, UK arrivals coming home were told they'd have to isolate when they got back. But on January the 27th, ministers promised those arriving home would have to go straight to quarantine in a hotel for 10 days. Yet tonight, government sources confirm that won't start until February the 15th, nearly 2 months after the new kind of coronavirus was first discovered. The hotel industry had complained they'd been kept in the dark, but documents seen tonight by the BBC show the government is looking for hotels in 10 different locations by airports or ports to be ready to take more than 1,000 arrivals a day across the country from the middle of February through till the end of March. Ministers are adamant the rules in place are stringent, but there have been tensions over travel quarantine from the very start of the pandemic. And now isolation in hotels on arrival is on the way. It will still only cover those coming home from hotspots and still won't come in for another 10 days.
It is utterly shambolic that this has been brought into effect on the 15th of February. That's over 50 days since the South African strain was first discovered in this country, and little wonder, frankly, that it reached our shores. It is nearly a year since hotel quarantining was introduced in other countries.
And the gap between announcing the plan and bringing it in meant travellers like Jessica Gold, who was in South Africa for business, could race home. After several cancelled flights, she made it back.
Our haste was to get back to the UK, first of all because, as I said, flights were being cancelled, but also because of this hotel quarantine that they wanted to implement. So we wanted to make it home.
In 10 days or so, the hotel proposal should become a reality, perhaps along with bigger fines for those who break the rules at the border. Clamping down on coronavirus has never just been a question of what happens here at home. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Almost 10.5 million people have now had their first coronavirus vaccine, and the government looks on course to meet its target of 15 million by the middle of this month. Doctors are being urged to step up efforts to reach vulnerable elderly people who've not been able to get to vaccination hubs. Now NHS staff are being sent out into the community to make sure that everyone who should have the vaccine will get it. Our health editor Hugh Pym reports.
Out of the fridge and off into the community. This GP-led team is preparing doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine to take out to immunise those in priority groups who find it difficult to leave their homes.
Either they're clinically unwell, physically unable to get out, or they may have shielding reasons where they're not able to leave their house.
The team arrive at the home of Cynthia, aged 84, who's with her son Tim.
Just to come in? Sure.
Tim filmed Cynthia having her jab.
There we go. All right.
She has health issues which made it difficult to get to a vaccination centre. Originally, she was offered an appointment miles away from her North London home.
Yes, they gave me Birmingham.
How do you feel now you've had your vaccination?
Okay.
Touch wood.
Touch wood, yeah.
These vaccinators have been recruited from a range of local health staff.
It's about taking what is essentially a vaccination hub into somebody's house. Myself and my physiotherapy colleagues and the nurses as well were all absolutely delighted to be part of it. It feels historical.
The team here are confident they can get through all their housebound patients in priority groups by the middle of this month. But in other areas, it seems to be proving more difficult.
Well, the thing is you can't walk.
Antonia hasn't had her jab yet, and her home care provider says there are several examples of people who've so far missed out.
I think in many cases, the people that we're looking after who haven't been vaccinated just yet, but are above the age of 70 and 80, they have received a request and a form which they can use to become vaccinated, but travelling to a vaccination centre is very difficult.
The latest figures show that in England, the South West had the highest proportion of those aged 80 and over to have received a first dose, nearly 93%. This was followed by the North East and Yorkshire. The lowest region was London at just under 75%. Scotland's figure was just over 80%, and in Wales it was around 77% of those aged 80 and over. Figures for Northern Ireland aren't yet available. The target is to offer all aged 80 and over a first jab by the middle of this month. Progress has been made, but there's still a little way to go. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The latest government coronavirus figures show new cases have been falling for a month now. There were 20,634 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. On average, in the last week, 21,246 new cases were reported every day. The number of people in hospital across the UK is still high, though, at 31,670, but that is a fall of more than 3,000 patients since this time last week. 915 deaths were reported. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. On average, in the past week, 1,018 deaths were announced every day. The total number of deaths so far across the UK is 110,250. Meanwhile, the vaccination rollout continues apace. 469,016 people have had their first dose of one of the 3 approved COVID-19 vaccines in the last 24-hour period. It means almost 10.5 million people have now had their first jab. Well, our health editor Hugh Pym is with me now. So cases, deaths and hospitalisations are all going down, but still not fast enough.
Yes, I think that's right, Sophie, that health officials want to see more progress on all these fronts before they can get anywhere close to making decisions about opening up restrictions. But the vaccination programme is going well. 10.5 people have had that first dose. The government target is for 15 million in the 4 priority groups to have had their first jab by February the 15th. That's the beginning of the week after next. And ministers are quietly confident that they can hit that target. And the importance of getting those groups vaccinated by that date is, particularly for the 70-year-old age group and older, to then give them 3 weeks to build up maximum immunity so that schools can then open on March the 8th in England. So that's the plan, which seems to be on track, but obviously not everything works out according to plan. And BBC News has discovered that a major London hospital trust, Barts Health, which has been vaccinating its own staff and other local care staff, has inadvertently sent out invitations and messages to school staff with passwords to let them book vaccinations, and that's been forwarded by local school management in some areas to hundreds of school teachers, some of whom have gone ahead and been vaccinated in good faith. Now, they of course are not in the 4 priority groups, and Barts Health has put out a statement saying this shouldn't have happened. They're going to put things in place to ensure the system is more secure. And of course, anything that gets in the way of the priority groups being vaccinated could delay the whole thing. There have been reports of this happening in one other area. They could, of course, be isolated incidents, and overall, this plan does seem to be working as it should do right now.
Hubin, thank you. At the start of the pandemic, people receiving universal credit were given an extra £20 a week to help them cope during the crisis. That benefit rise is due to run out at the end of next month. Now the Prime Minister is being warned that scrapping it could harm the health of millions of people for decades. A coalition of health organisations have written to Boris Johnson urging him to keep the extra money in place. Our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan has been speaking to some of those affected.
For me, the universal credit extra £20 is a lifeline that allows me to stay in the job that I'm in.
£20 a week to me is literally our food spend.
Just about set off 75 miles to work this morning, same as every morning. Here we go. And it's a balmy 2 degrees.
Another 5 a.m. start for Caroline Shelton. After being made redundant due to the pandemic, the only job the chemist could find involves a 3-hour commute. Her salary is topped up by universal credit, which pays her £54 a month.
That £54 is 4 days' fuel. It's a huge help for me. It means the difference between being in debt and not being in debt. That payment comes at a time in the month for me where it's just before I get paid.
The single mother of 2 from Leeds fears any cuts to universal credit as her small benefit payment helps her cope.
That peace of mind is priceless. That's my sleep and my mental health.
The increase in universal credit costs the government around £6 billion, but since 2010, more than £30 billion has been cut from the benefits of people of working age. Even with the extra £20, a single person without children who loses their job will see the greatest drop in income of any comparable economy. In Luxembourg, those claimants receive 86% of average earnings in benefit payments. In France, it's 68%, a bit lower in the United States and Ireland. Here, they receive just 17% of average earnings. For Rebecca and her daughter, the extra £20 allows her to add fruit and veg to her weekly shop.
When already you're scraping for pennies, £20 is massive. £80 a month is huge. You know, that's literally our food spend.
Rebecca, who works part-time for a charity, says the idea of paying a one-off lump sum, as ministers are considering, rather than keeping the uplift, is the wrong approach.
I don't need £1,000. What I need is long-term security and stability for myself and my daughter. That's the only way we're ever going to get our life situation better.
A huge range of health and anti-poverty groups are urging the government to keep the £20 payment. A decision is expected next month. Ministers say they're committed to supporting the lowest paid families. Michael Buchanan, BBC News.
There's been international condemnation of China after the BBC reported claims that women in so-called re-education camps for the Uyghur Muslim minority are being raped and tortured. The British and US governments are now calling on Beijing to allow independent investigators into the camps. China has denied the allegations and accused the BBC of making a false report. Matthew Hill has spoken to several former detainees for his report, and you may find some of their accounts distressing.
Terzanai Zaiwuddin is reliving a story she can barely bring herself to tell. She was held at one of Xinjiang's so-called re-education camps. These satellite images show the site where Tezanai says she was held, sharing a cell with 13 other women. She's haunted by one image, masked men coming down a camp corridor like this one after midnight.
They were 3 men. Not one, but 3. They did whatever evil their mind could think of, and they didn't spare any part of my body, biting it to the extent that it was disgusting to look at. They didn't just rape, they were barbaric. They had bitten all over my body.
The US have granted her safe refuge after investigating her claims. She's waived her right to anonymity and now feels free to speak out about the full extent of the abuse she says she suffered.
They had an electric baton. I didn't know what it was. It was pushed into my private parts and I was tormented with electric shocks.
It's estimated over 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslims are held in the camps. These never-before-broadcast pictures were filmed secretly in a camp under construction and published by a magazine on religious liberty. Many former camp inmates flee to Istanbul. Some talk of being forced to choose between punishment or complicity in these crimes.
Han Chinese men would pay money to have their pick of the pretty young inmates. My job is to remove their clothes and then handcuff them on their beds so they cannot move.
The testimony of the women we've interviewed has sparked international condemnation. The US State Department said the atrocities they describe shock the conscience. And tonight, President Biden has revealed human rights in China will be a priority for his administration. Here too, in Parliament today, the treatment of the women was condemned by the Foreign Office.
The evidence of the scale and the severity of these violations is now far-reaching. It paints a truly harrowing picture. If China wishes to dispute this evidence, then it must allow unfettered access to the region for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights or another independent fact-finding body.
China has responded to our investigation, insisting its camps are vocational training centres designed to stop Muslims living in the region from turning to extremism. It accuses the BBC of lies and misinformation.
There is no so-called systemic sexual assault and abuse against women. China is a country ruled by law. Our constitution guarantees and protects human rights, and it is embodied in our legal system and the government's work.
These women have spoken out about rape, which in their culture is an unspoken crime, because they want their stories heard. It seems much of the world is listening. Matthew Hill, BBC News.
The Prime Minister is being urged to block plans for a new coal mine in Whitehaven in Cumbria. Dozens of environmental groups have written to him saying they're mystified that the government has not intervened, even though it's due to host a global climate summit in Glasgow this year. Downing Street insists the government is a world leader in climate policy and won't reverse the decision. Here's our chief environment correspondent, Justin Rolat.
And beneath this land lie more than 200 million tonnes of coal.
It is more than half a century since the last deep coal mine opened in the UK. The plan is to burrow under the Irish Sea to access a vast deposit of high-quality coal. The local mayor is delighted.
I think the project is absolutely fantastic. You know, it'll bring huge amounts of jobs and prosperity into the area. It's been broadly welcomed right across Copeland. I've never known a project that's carried so much public support.
The coal produced here won't be used to generate power, but to make steel, he says, and means less will need to be imported in future. But the decision comes as Britain prepares to host a crucial international climate conference here in Glasgow in November. If it goes ahead as planned, it will be the biggest gathering of world leaders in UK history. That's why environmental organisations from Greenpeace to the RSPB to the Women's Institutes have today written to the Prime Minister to demand that the mine be stopped. The PM's dad also opposes it.
It's a massive mistake in public relations terms, that's for sure. How can we ask other countries to bring in their climate change reduction programs when we are now reopening the whole coal argument here in Britain?
The government defends the decision to allow the mine to open, saying the UK is cutting emissions faster than any other country. And it's true, when it comes to decarbonisation, Britain is a world leader. Our coal consumption has fallen 90% in just the last 5 years. Only 4 power stations still burn the stuff, and look what that has done to Britain's carbon emissions. Now, some European countries are doing pretty well too, but in most big economies, look at this, emissions are still rising. Critics say opening a new coal mine here threatens to undermine not only the UK's green reputation, but also its ability to demand other countries make ambitious carbon cuts. Now, if that makes it less likely that the big climate conference in Glasgow leads to meaningful action on climate change, it will have consequences for us all. Justin Rowlatt, BBC News.
Police Scotland say they are currently dealing with 2 serious incidents in Kilmarnock. Officers have cordoned off Cross House Hospital and part of the town around Portland Street. The regional NHS board says the hospital is under lockdown, with ambulances being diverted. Police are asking people to avoid both areas. Famous names, including Rihanna and Greta Thunberg, have been making the headlines in India for showing their support for the farmers who are protesting across the country. The farmers have been demonstrating over plans to give the private sector a greater say in agriculture, even though the government insists it will leave them better off. The protests led to violent clashes with police last week. Rajini Vaidyanathan has the story.
Fighting for their future. The people who help feed this nation. More than half of Indians are farmers. Tens of thousands have been camped here for months. A busy road into the capital. Now, a place of resistance. As they protest new laws they fear will destroy their livelihoods. As this site has grown, so too the police presence. Farmers accuse the government of trying to silence them. For 2 months, Devilal's been sleeping on the back of this truck with 7 others.
We are fighting for our land. We are fighting for our rights. We won't go back until these laws are repealed, even if we have to give our lives for the cause.
And he believes those new laws will drive him out of business. He took me to his farm to explain why. At 30 years old, he's the future of Indian farming. But the government says that for farming to have a future, the industry needs to be reformed. It says its new laws will benefit farmers by allowing them to sell directly to supermarkets and online retailers.
We get a fixed price from the government for our crops. I'm worried once the big corporations enter the market, we'll have to sell at a price they want.
Passions are running high. Last week, hundreds of police and protesters were injured after a march into Delhi turned violent. Demonstrators scaled the city's iconic Red Fort, leaving many wondering whether the country's Prime Minister has lost control on this issue. Known as India's strongman, he's weakened his resolve, offering to suspend the laws for 18 months.
What started here at the end of last year has now grown into a mass movement, one that's become about more than just the agriculture laws. Many farmers I've spoken to here who voted for Prime Minister Modi say they're now increasingly concerned about his government's handling of other issues, including freedom of speech, high unemployment and the right to protest.
The farmers remained defiant, even after officials suspended internet access at protest sites, social media accounts were blocked, and journalists were detained. The farmers say they're not going anywhere until the laws are scrapped. Rajini Vaidyanathan, BBC News, Delhi.
Football now, and Chelsea's new manager, Thomas Tuchel, faced his first big test this evening as the Blues took on Tottenham in the Premier League. Natalie Perks watched the action.
A friendly welcome for the new boy. Thomas Tuchel's first big test was against a manager all too familiar to Chelsea fans. But it was Tuchel's Blues asking all the right questions, and Eric Dyer gave the clumsiest of answers.
Well, there's contact, it's a penalty. He's left his foot.
Jorginho with the penalty to put Chelsea into a deserved lead.
He just rams it into the corner.
Mourinho had never lost back-to-back home league games as a manager, but without Harry Kane, Spurs didn't quite look so able.
And headed wide.
Tottenham did exert some pressure, but it was on their own goalkeeper. Jose's incredulity plain to see. That at least warmed Hugo Lloris up nicely to make a smart save.
Bounce, good save.
After yet another Chelsea attack. Spurs did have late chances at redemption, but ultimately deserved their third straight league loss. And as Tuchel celebrated in the driving rain, Tottenham's dreams appear to be drowning. Natalie Perks, BBC News.
Now, when the first lockdown came into force almost a year ago, there was speculation it could lead to a baby boom. There's no official data yet, but it looks like lockdown may have had the reverse effect. However, one street in Bristol seems to be bucking the trend, as John Kay reports.
First, it was Jenny, then Catherine, then Caroline, followed by Victoria, then Ellie, and now Ailey.
Well, it started with just a couple, and then we found out that we were due, and then I was speaking to Jenny, and maybe I started a trend. Every time I spoke to someone else, it was like the number basically increased. There's something in the water. 4 to like 5, and then 6. There are just women popping up every day, it felt like. It's been fantastic.
Oh, my jaw hit the floor. Really? Yeah, I was like, I can't believe it. This little street.
Not just on the same street, but all on the same side of the street.
I dare to ask how many are pregnant on the other side, if it matches this side. Because we were all friends as well. Everybody's feeling a bit nervous, I think, all the people who aren't pregnant. In the first lockdown, lots of people went out and got dogs. You didn't want a dog.
We've been going running, we've been baking bread.
You're reading.
And we've been making babies.
Can't go out, you can't really see people as much, so maybe it's time to settle down. We are kind of supporting one another. Ailey set up a yoga class, which is fantastic. Breathe out. Oh, it's so nice to connect with other women who are going through a similar experience at the same time. Particularly as a first-time mum, not having any of the kind of baby groups and things that would normally be happening.
But so much for the rule of 6. I can't give you any names. They don't want to go public yet, but I can tell you there will be some more announcements on this street very soon.
With babies arriving all the way through to August, it just feels like an exciting, positive time. Just a slight forward fold.
Hang on. 5? Where's Jenny? Well, tonight, some breaking news. Jenny and Rick have a baby daughter, Summer, born this afternoon. The Clouds Hill Avenue lockdown baby boom is underway. John Kay, BBC News, Bristol.
And that's it from us now on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Good night.